Alright, hello, welcome back. So this video is going to talk about, very briefly, the assessment and what we need to do when we are assessing dyslexia. Alright, so hopefully after watching this video you'll be able to discuss the important components as well as create a personalized dyslexia assessment for whatever child or adult you need to assess. Okay, so first let's talk about what types of assessment there are for dyslexia. In general, there's 4 types. There are screening, progress monitoring, outcomes, and diagnostic. We will briefly go over all of them, although we will definitely spend much more time on diagnostic. Okay, so screening. Universal screening, as I mentioned in previous videos, many states have requirements for universal screening. These are very quick assessments. Usually each one is about a minute, and maybe they'll do 2 or 3. And the idea is that it is administered to everyone in the entire grade. So again, it's super quick, and it's really just looking at could there be a problem? Okay. Some real common ones are Dibbles, Ames Web, those kinds of things. All right, next is progress monitoring. These are often done usually, about 3 times a year, in fall, winter, and spring. Often it is the same assessments that are used in the universal screening. And it's, again, super quick. It just is looking at, okay, is there anybody that's been, in the general education that's now falling, or those that have been in, higher tiers, are they now doing great and can, move back into just general ed? And then the last of the 3 that SLPs don't really deal with are outcomes testing. And those are the summative assessments that look more at, how the school or how the district is doing, possibly even how the state is doing. They're usually standardized, they're norm referenced, things like the MAP testing or OAKS, STAR. There's a lot of them. And it is, those tests that you sit a kid down, the entire class takes it in front of the computer, and away you go. Okay, so the last one is diagnostic, and that's where we're going to spend our time in this video. A diagnostic is, it has an extensive battery. It's almost always individually administered. Hopefully, it's pretty comprehensive. Its purpose may be to plan intervention. Its purpose may be for eligibility. Ideally, it's, for both, really. There is a lot to a diagnostic dyslexia assessment. And so hopefully by doing all that, you really are planning intervention, not just deciding whether or not they're eligible. All right, so let's dig into the diagnostic assessment. So these are the components that IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, say are part of an educational evaluation. Some of these are definitely under an SLP's purview, some a little less, but we will rapidly go through all of the above. Okay, so the first one is phonological awareness. Hopefully as an SLP we all know what that is, but it is that ability to manipulate the sounds in words. And I'm going to jump down to phonics skills down here. The difference between phonics and phonological awareness. Phonics has a phonological awareness component, but it is really the mapping of the sound to the orthographic symbol, the grapheme. So there's a lot of components, but phonics is really the mapping, whereas phonological awareness, and now they're showing that with phonological awareness, having a visual component to it is actually improves the efficacy of it. But it's still different than phonics because, again, the phonological awareness aspect is the manipulation, right? So being able to pull apart or add together, whereas phonics is just simply more mapping, all right? The next piece is phonological or language-based memory. Again, so that working memory piece, that phonological memory, just being able to hold those pieces, because if you can't hold the pieces, then it's very difficult to manipulate them. All right, the next one is rapid automatic naming. This is important because if you're looking at phonological awareness and rapid automatic naming, those are two components with, if they have difficulty in both, it's considered a double deficit, which is different than the double deficit that we talked about in the reading quad. But there's nothing that we can do to make rapid automatic naming better, so it's not an intervention goal, but it's important to know, what the prognosis could be. All right, then there's receptive vocabulary. As SLPs, we're all very familiar with that. We already talked about phonics. And then there is decoding. And when we test decoding, we need to look at both real words and nonsense words. Again, individuals with dyslexia often have, a very strong vocabulary, and especially, the brighter individuals can really, fly under the radar for a long time because they're able to, really use their other skills, right? So they compensate and, again, fly under the radar. So it's important to include nonsense words because by definition, they don't exist, right? So these individuals won't have come across them and they can't recognize them just from context or from memory. Then there is oral reading fluency, and we need to look at both single words as well as connected speech or connected text, I guess. And then there is spelling, which I can go on and on for hours about. But again, remember that a hallmark of dyslexia is poor spelling. And then we also need to consider writing, both, again, at the sentence level and the paragraph level. Okay, so then looking at evaluation, and this is actually using the model from the TILs, which we will get into in a minute. But we need to consider these components, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and memory. But we need to consider them in both the sound or the word level, as well as the connected or the sentence and discourse. Okay? So as we're testing, we need to think of all 5 of those aspects that occur. But we need to think about, okay, well, when they are listening, are they able to do it at the sound word, but it falls apart at sentence discourse? Or is the reverse true? That, once they have some context, they can hold on to things, but at the sound word, everything falls apart, right? So that would seem to indicate more of dyslexia, because again, it's the phonological system. These individuals often have great ability to listen and really, use other information. But when it's down to the individual sound level, they may fall apart. So they may have very poor phonemic awareness, but fantastic following directions, right? That subtest on, there's a subtest on the TILs as well as the self. They do great on that. But if you put them down to the sound or word level, it may be very difficult, okay? So there's lots of different ways that we can assess dyslexia, but it's important to think about the different modalities, but also the different levels. All right. So Then last but not least, we'll just talk about some popular assessments super quickly. The TILS has been out, I don't know, for probably about 10 years now, maybe. And it is a comprehensive language and literacy assessment. It is the first of its kind. It looks at, a lot of language, as well as, it has some phonemic awareness. It has reading. It has writing. It was written by a speech pathologist. It is an absolutely great assessment. I will warn you, it is very long and it is very difficult. It's very, there's a lot of different moving parts. Number 2, the tests of dyslexia. This is a new assessment. I honestly know nothing about it yet. It's coming from Western Publishing in the fall of 2023. It looks to be very promising, but I know nothing about it at this point. All right, and then you have the reading tests. GORT 5, the gray oral reading test, is a very common one. And this just gives you an overview of reading. It gives you a fluency, it gives you the rate, it gives you a comprehension score. One thing to really think about with those types of assessments is they'll give you a comprehension score, but they certainly don't go into depth. They aren't looking at, are these concrete? In other words, is the information right there? So is it in the text, or is it between the lines of the text? Is it an inference question? It just simply is, okay, they got, 4 out of 5 questions correct. So that is important, and it is norm referenced, so that does give you some idea. But again, we need to dig deeper, but it does give you a good start, and it does, again, give you a fluency and a rate, which is important. All right, then we have the RAN RAS, which looks at both rapid automatic naming and rapid, alternating stimuli. Again, is it super important? It depends upon how deep of a dyslexia assessment you're doing. All right, and then the CTOP, no idea. Comprehensive test of phonological processing, maybe? I don't know. But it is a super in-depth test of phonological awareness. If you are in the schools and you don't have a copy of it, talk to your school psychologist. A lot of times school psychologists do that testing. I'm not sure why. But this looks at all the different components of phonological awareness. All right. And then there are just a whole bunch of what I call others, right? So when I'm doing an assessment, I direct our literacy diagnostic team. We usually start with the TILS, right? It's a comprehensive language and literacy assessment, and we can really look from there. I follow Scarborough's rope. Okay, so I want my students to be able to answer, yep, they're great at it, or oof, not so great, for all of those different components on Scarborough's rope. So, if it looks like, everything seems to be going well, and, we give the GORT then, okay, well, actually, their fluency and their rate is not so great. Then we'll probably do the RAN RAS and the CTOP. Now, if we do the TILS and what really seems to be the issue is more of their comprehension versus their reading, then we will go from there and give more of a language assessment. If, of course, it looks like there's both issues, then we'll go both directions. We'll go, we'll test both of those strands. but we really want, to find out about their comprehension if we think that's what the issue is. If they're getting the words off the page just fine, great. So then we need to investigate, what difficulties in their language or their listening comprehension that we need to do. So that's, looking at things like the self. The self isn't my favorite assessment, but when you are looking at school age and academics, it really does a good job of looking at academics. If it's other types of kiddos, I won't use the self, but for academics, I do tend to rely on it. Vocabulary, the Peabody's always a favorite. There's also the MAVA, the Montgomery Assessment of Vocabulary Assessment. I don't know. There's lots of vocabulary tests. Receptive is more important than looking at expressive, but again, if you really are finding that the difficulty is solely in language, you really want to go deep into the language. Some others that are listed here, the opus, which is the oral paragraph, I don't know, but it looks at the comprehension of paragraphs rather than single words or sentences. So again, thinking back to that other slide, are you looking at sound words? Are you looking at sentences? Are you looking at discourse, right? So the opus looks at big chunks of text. The test of narrative language does both receptive and expressive. And then there's also, informal measures. I really like using the SALT, the Systematic Assessment of Language Transcripts. It is, can be a little tedious to figure out how to use, but they have really done a great job of creating a database for, and then there's the SALT. The SALT, they've really done a great job of creating a database for some different literacy aspects. So they have a few different protocols where you read, I think they have, 5 books or something, age-based. And based on the age, you read the book and then you give the kiddo a copy that has all the words basically taped out. And you ask them to retell, and then there's some questions. And so you record all of this, you transcribe it, and you can feed it into SALT. The Systematic Analysis of Language Transcripts, I think is what it's called. And so that's kind of the best of both worlds. It gives you, some solid, rich, individualized, informal, but it also allows you to compare to some norms as well. All right. And then there are just simply a whole bunch of informal assessments. It's really important to pull in the, child's curriculum. What are they doing in the classroom, and ask the, teacher for some samples of their writing and so forth. Okay. All right. Well, I know that was super quick and super brief. I could go for hours about assessment. So if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Great way to get a hold of me is at chashelsky@ucmo.edu. All right. Have a good one.